Hello and welcome to the Dental Labcast. My name is Jenna.
My name is Andrea.
Please follow and subscribe to support our show and to make sure that you never miss an episode.
Welcome to the next episode of the Dental Labcast. Welcome to our episode of the Dental Lab podcast at the DTS in Birmingham. I am on my own today because Jenna can't be with us, so she's left it in my hands. We'll see how that works out. But we have Mark Ambridge with us, who is a fabulous guest. So please, Mark, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you. Who are you? What do you do? Why are you here talking to me?
Okay, yeah. Hi, Andrea. Thank you very much for inviting me to come and say a few words. As Andrea says, I'm Mark Ambridge. I've been a technician for longer than I care to remember. I think I qualified in 1984. Opened a laboratory in 86, and this is 40 years down the line. Still going strong. Still making prostheses the best we can. And I've got a good, strong, capable team.
So when you came into dental technology, so most people we've spoken to about dental technology, we say, how did you come into it? And almost everyone will go, I sort of fell into it by accident. Was that the same for you?
Yeah, very much so. I basically, this is old school now. I left school on a Tuesday, I think it was, or a Wednesday, and started work on a Monday. So there wasn't enough time to take a year out in those days and go traveling. The only traveling I could do was to go back home. And basically, throughout the last 6 months of school, we'd been encouraged to apply for jobs in industry. And as I was leaving school, I got a job in engineering, in an iron casting foundry. And I got taken on there as a trainee estimator, and a foundry technician. So, I was straight in learning how to cast metal. It's something I'd never, I mean, they don't teach you these things at school, do they? I was learning how to cast metal, learning the defects of casting metal, the problems that were occurring every day in casting metal. And because I was office based, I was allowed to suggest reasons, learn alternatives, and I absolutely loved the job. And then suddenly we hit a point where the Far East could do everything cheaper and better. So the factory closed down, and I lost my job. And this is in a time before the internet. So we've got job centres. I come from Leeds. I went around to job centres all over Leeds, registering myself with those job centres, and got nothing. And the time was around when I think 1 in 10 people were unemployed. It was massive unemployment. So it just so happens that my mother at the time was a dispensary lady at Leeds Dental School, and she came home one evening and said, "The dental school have got vacancies for trainee technicians." And I said, "What's one of those?" As people still say. She said, "Do you want me to get you a form?" She said, "Oh, they make the dentures, they make the teeth for the dentists, for the patients." So, long story short, she got me a form. I applied for the job, got through to interview stage. The interview was one of those that you see on Dragon's Den. It was sat in front of 9 people, all quizzing you about why you wanted to do the job. And in the meantime, what I'd actually done, my mother had brought me a Lacron home to borrow from the surgeries, some temporary crowns, some little single temporary crowns, and a candle. And I carved the teeth, replicated the teeth out of a candle, and took them with me to the interview. And one of the interviewers said, what have you brought in that little, like a jewellery box I had with me, a cardboard box? And I says, "Oh, it's some stuff I made. I thought you might like to see it." I took it out and I gave it to the person at the front, and they passed it down the line, and they just went silent. And one of them said, and it was Graham Dolphin, who was at the time the head of the Leeds Polytechnic that was training us, Kitson College. He was the head of Kitson for the dental department. And he said, what have you carved? How have you made these? And I told him, I said, well, I had a little tool that my mother borrowed from the hospital. He says, and what is it made from? I said, candle wax. And he went, oh my God. He says, you've got the job as far as I'm concerned. But it wasn't as simple as that. We then went to round 2 where we had to do practical work in a room with, I got through to the final 12. And then we had to do practical tests, which were, I mean, it was a joke. You had to bend a piece of wire into a figure 8 and make a plasticine heart. Yeah, at the end of the story is that I got accepted as a trainee, and I loved it. I loved the training at dental school. I would say is possibly the best you can get, because I've trained probably 20, somewhere in the region of 20 staff over my years, and unfortunately they're a commodity, so they also have to work as well as learning. Well, at the dental school you didn't. You made a set of special trays, and then you waited for an impression to come back in those trays, which you then cast a model, and you followed the whole process through. So you didn't have to sit down and do 20 other special trays on the same day. You made 2 to the best of your ability, how you'd been shown, and you followed every process through. And I mean, what a great way of training.
So how long did that training take? Because obviously that's almost sounds like someone who went to college or uni full time, as opposed to a lot of people who do day release and are working in a commercial lab and, like you say, expected to earn the keep while they're doing it. So how long before, or did you just stay there for years, more or less sort of working like that for quite some time?
No, it was in the time it was the standard 5-year course, 4 years if you had the A level, but the O level it was in those days, the GCSEs as I think they call them. If you had the correct qualifications, it was 4 years. I unfortunately didn't have one of the sciences that you needed, so I had to do an academic year. But the hospital put you through 2 years at once. So the 5-year course was only 3 years as a hospital student. So the beauty of it was expressed, but you also got to meet the double years of other students. So you were with year 1 and 2, and then you were with year 2 and 3, and then you were with year 5 throughout the training.
So how many of you were the training at any one time then? Was there a lot of students going through dental technology? Because it sounds like quite a competitive process for you, even just to get into it.
Yeah, there was, we had full classes, 30 to 40 people per year in each class each week. And the hospital took, it wasn't just me they took on, there was a position for 3. So their elimination process through the interviews was to take down from 100 that applied down to 20 for the interviews to 3 successfuls. And every year they did the same thing. So in that 3 years of training, you were with 2 lots of 3 other students who were in the years above you, and then as you moved through those years, they were in the years below. So it was a really cultural environment. You also had your own student laboratory, but you were part and parcel of learning from the main laboratory, from time served and qualified technicians.
So you were like part of a team from day one, really, then, weren't you? And
oh yeah.
Students from other years all mingling together, like helping each other out.
Of course, yeah. It was part and parcel. If you'd already done that process and you saw someone struggling with it, you said, "Oh, wow, I tried this or I did that, and that worked for me." And that's the same way that the qualified technicians who were there doing a full-time job, they were supplying dental work for the dental school. And they would help you for anything you ever needed. You'd just go, your tutor would say, oh, you're best going to see Tom for that, or you're best going to see Jane for that one, and you just go see these qualified technicians who were good enough to give you their time and experience to help you learn.
I mean, it sounds like an incredibly brilliant experience, to be fair. I mean, the amount of people who wouldn't have had that kind of quality training and input and expertise to rely on. So what made you go into the field that you're in now? What were you doing primarily then? Were you doing all three disciplines and then you had to pick one, or how did you move on from that?
So the deal with the dental school was that you didn't have a guaranteed job at the end of the training. Like a dentist, they go through dental school and they come out at the end of dental school with a qualification where they then go out and work in dental practice. The same is for the dental students, for the technician students, is that you were given access to the superb training, but at the end of that you had to find yourself a job. And at the end of my training, it just so happened that some receptionist from a dental practice in Ripon called the dental school and spoke to the lab manager at the time and said, "We've got a position for a dental technician. Do you have any who are looking for jobs?"
The spare, yeah,
do you have
one
any spare?
job.
Yeah. So he basically came into the student lab and said that to all three of us who'd qualifying, who were just coming through the qualification process, and said, "Oh, there's a job over in Ripon if anybody fancies it." And at the time there was me, Carol, and Nick, and I said, "Yeah, I fancy it." Carol was wanting to stay on to become a teacher. And Nick didn't know what he wanted to do at the time anyway. So I said, yeah, I'm up for that. So I got the details, found where Ripon was, because I had no idea. and my mother took me through for the interview. And I met this crazy dentist who was just absolutely wonderful bloke, just a ball of fun, and his associate at the time. And I remember they sat me down in the lab and introduced me and showed me around the place and said, right, we want someone to make orthodontic appliances, crowns and chromes. And I said, yeah, well, I can do all them. So they gave me a model, some 0.7 wire and some pliers and some snips, and said, make some cribs on that and we'll come back in half an hour. And I thought, okay. Half an hour? Where are they going for lunch? Anyway, so I bent a couple of cribs up and left them on the job, and they came back in, and the younger lad, it was the younger lad, Andy. He said he looked at them, picked them up, and he was an orthodontist. He looked at them, picked them up, and he went, "Yeah, they're pretty good." He says, "Where's all the waste wire?" I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, all the ones that haven't worked, all the ones you've bent that didn't fit." He says, "Where have you thrown all them?" I says, there aren't any. I says, "We just bent two up. You wanted two, I put two on it." And he couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe it because the technicians they'd had before were hopeless and they couldn't make cribs. They couldn't do anyway. I got the job. And at the time of getting the job, they said, "Do you know anyone else who wants a job? Because we've also got a slot for a Crown and Bridge technician." And I thought, damn, I wish that had been me. So I told Nick, who trained with me at the time at the dental school, I said, "Look, they're looking for a Crown and Bridge technician. Do you fancy doing it?" And he said, "Yeah, I'll give it a go." And that was it. We both started work within a month or two of each other, and worked for a while for this dentist until Nick left and moved on to pastures greener in Sheffield, I think. And the dentist turned to me and said, "Can you do Crown and Bridge?" I said, "Well, I'll give it a go." And yeah, it was fairly straightforward. Yeah, they were good enough as well. They sent me. I mean, this is so long ago. I'm thinking back now. We were making PJCs on foil and tin plating the foils. That was as bonded as our work got back then. I mean, think of the changes. It's huge. I remember being sent to London on a course Panadent to learn Vita VMK. It was a new process that had literally just come out, and they were training technicians. And I went down there, and I think it was like a 3-day course. We did a single crown, anterior crown, posterior crown, and a 3-unit bridge. And it was sticking porcelain to metal, which was just unknown. It was madness. But hey, even that's history now.
Yeah. So I was just talking to a few other people literally half an hour ago. We were talking about the changes that there's been in dental technology. So when I first started training from like the 60s and 70s, we're still really relevant because nothing had changed for decades. The materials hadn't changed. The procedures hadn't changed. I mean, basically, we weren't doing vulcanite. That had thankfully gone before I started. And
Oh, no, I remember the smell.
I've heard about vulcanite. I've never seen it. I've never experienced it. I've heard it.
Imagine a bowl of rotten eggs,
right,
on the cooker, heated up. Oh my
no.
God, it stunk.
Really?
Yeah, it was a disgusting smell.
And like the material was it like ridiculously hard? What? Describe the material to me.
So I on heart, I never had to make one, but the old boy in the lab, he still did dentures and did denture repairs in vulcanite. If it was a vulcanite denture, he'd maybe put a new pallet in vulcanite. Was like a soft wax, but rubbery and slightly sticky. And you cut it to shape, and you formed it around the palate, and you formed it around the ridge, and you stuck the teeth on it, and you squished it around the teeth, but it was still like a warm wax. It wanted to move, so you then had to flask it fairly quickly, and then it went in a clamp and went in a pressure cooker. And obviously the steam coming out of the pressure cooker contained the smell that you will never forget.
And so I'm imagining, based on your description then, that sometimes you'd get it out and find that it had slumped or moved or changed a bit, if it was that.
I must admit, it wasn't my bag.
No.
It seemed to, and thankfully it was disappearing.
Yeah.
As I started in dentistry. So I really don't know anything about it. I remember the prosthetic side. The smell was as bad when they had to grind it to repair it with acrylic because nothing bonded to it.
No.
So they would have to do tongue and groove type cuts into the
mechanical
repair,
retention,
mechanical retention, and then fill that with cold cure.
Right. Okay.
But just the grinding of it was another smell.
I've not heard anyone lament the material at all. I genuinely haven't.
No,
yeah.
we're glad it went.
so yeah, like during all my time, like nothing had really changed, and then all of a sudden, in the last few years, it seems like everything is changing. Like with the digital technologies, it's changing the way we work. It's changed the materials that we're using. It's like all of us, like everything seems to be changing all at once.
Yeah. I mean, it is absolutely ballistic, the speed that the technology is overtaking. Well, I don't want to say overtaking, but is developing. I mean, I remember, as I say, we started off doing crowns. They were either acrylic crowns or flasked in little pots, or they were PJCs, and then along came PJC skeds. Sked was where you did it on 2 foils, and you tin-plated the inside of the second foil, and that was a bonded. Then you actually bonded the opaque. The opaque stuck to the foil, and that was your first bonded crown. So they were about 10 times stronger than a normal PJC. You didn't pull the foil out afterwards; it stayed in. And then the what we now class as bonded work, the VMK system that came along, that changed the world. As much, I would say, as then years later, Emacs. I mean, Empress came along and that didn't quite work right. It got fractured and broke. Then Empress 2 was quite good, but Emacs changed dentistry, and it's still there. 20 years later, maybe more, Emacs is still on, and now the change is zirconia. Amazing zirconia, and the fact that you design it on a screen as opposed to waxing it up on a prep, you just would not have imagined that 30 years ago.
And I think it's changing the way that people work, in the fact that a lot of people are working remotely now as well, aren't they? So it's changing the dynamic in the lab as well. Do you think that's affecting, or do we need to change the way that we're recruiting people? Because obviously we've got the decline in technician numbers, which is quite a hot topic at the moment. How do you think the way things are changing now will affect that, or be affected by that?
Yeah, I get your question, and I mean, last year, I from my involvement with the BACD, where I'm technician representative on the board, I organised for technicians at the conference. I organised 2 days, one with a marketing guy and one with an Exocad expert, a digital expert. That was Mark Orborn and Scott Hippie. And Scott was saying at the time that he says he's done more holidaying since changing his career to becoming just purely a digital designer, because all he needs is a laptop. He can work from Singapore with someone in London the same as he can sat in Manchester. So I think it's an acceptable process. If the end result is what you want, it doesn't really matter where the design's been made, as long as it's been made by someone who knows what they're doing. And Scott is one of the experts anyway, so that's happening.
Yeah, I agree. I was chatting to Scott yesterday about the very same thing as well. I watch him quite a bit on social media. He's one of the nicest guys I've ever met. He's so
super lad,
modest as well, isn't he? He's so good. He's so modest. But as you were saying, he just travels all over the world and then just works. Spends a few hours doing a bit of work from wherever he is at the time, provided he's got an internet connection. He's fine, and he's just able to change his quality of life and change. So do you think the days of the technicians are working from 5 a.m. till 10 o'clock at night are starting to go? Because I think there's still quite a few people who work like that, aren't they? Is that changing?
From my direct point of view, yes. We don't work overtime. Nobody at my lab works overtime now. We finish at 4 o'clock. We start at 8:30. We finish at 4 o'clock, except for a Friday where they finish at 3:30. Right? And nobody has to work over. Now, this is not because they work really hard. It's because they work the same as they always worked, only I know we like to term it donkey work, but a lot of the manual work is now taken by machines. I leave the lab on an afternoon, let's say, and I look back and there's 2 printers are running. There's 2 milling machines running in the milling room, and all I have to do is make sure the compressor's on downstairs. and that is, I don't think we've lost anything. We haven't lost a skill. We've lost that. I mean, I was one of those that worked until 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, went home, got my head down, came back in at 7 o'clock and started again. And touch wood, nobody will have to do that ever again, because the technology, and we couldn't charge for that. Those hours that you put in, you can't convert that into £500 for a single crown unit. You can't do that. You have to fit that within your economy, within your scale. So the fact that the only one thing I'd say, the caveat to all that is how much equipment costs. I think to 30 years ago, sitting down and calculating whether I can afford to buy a new porcelain furnace because there's a new one come out and it's got this window where you can watch your post ceramic soldering go through, and thinking, well, it's £4,500. That's a lot of money. Can I really afford it? And then I look round at a printer now that's cost 60 grand, and another one that's on lease that I couldn't afford to buy because it's so expensive and they don't sell it. So I think I wouldn't like to have to do it again.
No. And I think there's still differences between the different disciplines as well, isn't there? Because I think Crown and Bridge seems to lend itself more to a digital workflow than I'm in orthodontics, for example, and we still seem to just be printing out models to then make appliances on printed models rather than on gypsum models until different appliance designs that can be direct printed or imagine generated materials are biocompatible enough to do that. So it's almost like we're having to change the types of appliances we make to lend them towards a digital environment.
Yeah, I must admit, I've not had any involvement in ortho for many, many years, and I've always wondered how. And I do see on some social media where some people are printing the acrylic of orthodontic appliances, and somehow they're printing them with the wires in position or putting the wires in afterwards. Or is it that it's a light cure material and that's been pressed on and then cured once it's in place? These multicolour appliances that you see, that obviously for kids. I don't know, but I just think I think the hand of technology now is so helpful, and maybe you're right. Maybe it's only benefiting the Crown and Bridge restorative and implant side, but digital dentures. And I think we have to see digital dentistry isn't digital dentistry. It's dentistry. It's just new dentistry.
Yeah.
And the digital processes are helping us live lives like other workers, not being constantly at work, but being able to go home and have weekends off and work proper hours instead of being that person that finishes at 10 o'clock at night and still covered in dust, and then they're delivering work on the way home and delivering work on the way back in.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I do think we are in a transition phase because it's always going to affect one discipline more than the other. But I think we will get there in all the disciplines. And like I say, digital dentures is becoming quite a big thing as well now. And I'm really excited about the technologies. I love new stuff. I like trying. And I must admit, I don't miss the majority of the plaster work, because even though we are mostly like printing out models to work on, with the exception of direct printing, odd splint and things like that, it's like study models. We used to have rooms full of study models, and we'd have to keep them for 20 odd years or until the patient was 25 or whichever was longest. And you'd drop a model and you'd break a tooth off and you'd be like, no. So I don't miss that, so it's definitely still massive benefits, even from a health perspective as well, because, you've not got all those materials and all the dust and all the chemicals.
That's true. That's true. You do have other materials though, so you've got to worry where all the printed models are going to go.
Oh,
I mean, you think about the problem with gypsum from the old gypsum models. And gypsum's now considered like a hazardous waste because it can create smells and gases underground when it's dumped. But what's going to happen to digital models? They're just going to last forever.
I know. And literally, we've got a couple of minutes left before we have to go. I can't believe how quickly the time's gone. I could be talking to you for ages and ages. But that is a massive subject, isn't it? Because gypsum is basically 100% recyclable. And we're printing out single-use plastics, which drives me crack. So I'm just sort of hoping we get to the stage where we're not having to print the models out at all.
Well, that is just round the corner. I mean, we do. One of our clients insists. He says, "Just model free. Just print me the crowns, and I'll fit them." And it always fits. So I think it's just the old school.
You think that's a confidence thing then? So a lot of people are just still wanting the model for a lot of things just so they can see it sat on the model.
Yeah, so we can see
not
the contacts.
That it actually is needed anymore.
We can see the contacts. We can see the occlusion. We can fine tune it if we need to.
We're still very tactile, aren't we? This is the thing.
Exactly.
Still...
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll have to wrap it up there. I'm like really sorry we haven't gone more time.
No problem.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very
it's been
much.
Absolutely brilliant.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you.